and its Zim elections, and Zimbabwe's former president Robert Mugabe has questioned whether tomorrow's elections will throw out the military government and actually bring back constitutionality. He was addressing the media right outside his home in the capital, Harare, a short while ago. It is Zimbabwe's first election since Mugabe was forced to resign last November after 37 years at the helm.
So the election tomorrow, I ask, is it to bring democracy, to bring constitutionality, to bring freedom, or shall we see the return of the same rule we have experienced since November.
Meanwhile, incumbent President Emmerson Mnangagwa, who is Mugabe's former ally in the ruling ZANU-PF party, faces opposition leader Nelson Chamisa of the MDC in tomorrow's polls. Mugabe says he will not vote for those who he says have tormented him.
I must say very clearly, I cannot vote for those who have tormented me. No, I can't. I'll make my choice among.
Well, Robert Mugabe has also encouraged the people of Zimbabwe to accept the outcome of tomorrow's vote.
The greatest damage we have done to our history, the greatest injustice we had done to ourselves. We had become a democratic country after our independence. We went to the assistance of others who were in trouble. Mozambique, we assisted Namibia, we were in the DRC, etc. Is this now the Zimbabwe which has become so undemocratic, so illegal in its actions and unconstitutional? I am talking on the eve of the day I longed for, that let the people go and vote. Let them go and vote freely, and I'm glad even ED has said people will be allowed to go to vote freely. And the result will be recognized.
Well, main opposition party leader in Zimbabwe, Nelson Chamisa of the Movement for Democratic Change, has welcomed former President Robert Mugabe's decision to vote for the MDC. Mugabe aired his views on the eve of Zimbabwe's election, saying that he would not be voting for current Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa. Mugabe stated very categorically that he cannot vote for those that tormented him, referring, of course, to the ZANU-PF. Chamisa, meanwhile, says he doesn't have any problem receiving one more vote. Let's now take you live to where our reporter Peter Ndoro has been monitoring events ahead of the Zimbabwe elections tomorrow. I see he's also with our other reporter, Crisalda Lewis. Peter and Crisalda, a very good afternoon to both of you. How are things going in Harare as, of course, those preparations get ahead for tomorrow's vote?
Alicia, thanks very much indeed, and welcome to everybody to a very warm Sunday afternoon here in Harare. Yeah, a day before historic elections are going to be taking place tomorrow, and what a day it's turned out to be. We woke up thinking that it's going to be calm, and at best we thought maybe we might get a statement from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, but we didn't expect much else. We knew that opposition leader Nelson Chamisa was going to have a press conference, and then we were caught by surprise. Former President Robert Mugabe, who's by and large been very quiet since he resigned from office in November, suddenly decided that he was going to have the press at his house for a conversation, and he spoke at length, and I think it's fair to say that he was not happy with the way things happened, and he hoped that tomorrow was going to restore constitutional rule in the country. But the other events that took place today, of course, was that presser with Nelson Chamisa. And Crisalda, you were there, and we're now starting to join the dots a little bit, because yesterday Nelson Chamisa spoke about Robert Mugabe. Nelson Chamisa had people who support Robert Mugabe as part of his entourage on the stadium, on the podium at the final rally. And then soon after, by coincidence, he holds a press conference.
Well, that's right, Peter. I think after that press briefing given by the former president, Robert Mugabe, where he mentioned that, he would not be voting for ZANU-PF, saying that he will not vote for people that put him in this position that he is in. And when many started asking questions on whether he would endorse Nelson Chamisa as a candidate in tomorrow's election, or to be the next president of this country, very much not surprised by the utterances that he shared, because when he was asked if he would endorse a woman president, he would vote for a woman president, he basically brushed that off. Of course, leaving Nelson Chamisa in the middle of it all. And at this press conference, shortly after the press conference that was given by Mugabe, of course we were going to ask Nelson Chamisa what he thought of the utterances by Mugabe. He basically said, well, he was not one to discriminate. He would welcome anyone that wants to vote for him in tomorrow's election. The more the merrier, he said. And in actual fact, though, did point out that he does not want Grace Mugabe, the former First Lady, in his party. He says that ZANU-PF should actually try and make amends with Mugabe because of what happened last year. But clearly, you heard in that press conference as well, Mugabe saying that he has not yet met Nelson Chamisa, but he would want to meet him if he does become president of the country following tomorrow's vote. So Nelson Chamisa not really brushing off anyone, saying anyone who wants to vote for the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance is certainly welcome, Mugabe included.
All right, you mentioned Grace, and the reason why we mention the former First Lady, of course, is that there are conspiracy theories, I suppose that's all we can really call them at this stage, is that she might have been elevated as high as Deputy President under Chamisa. There's this supposed connection where he received money and funding from the Mugabes to fund his campaign, and he's basically trying to rubbish this story.
Absolutely. There had been speculation, much of it, that the former President Robert Mugabe had been funding, propelling Nelson Chamisa, given the grievances that he has with ZANU-PF. Throughout that press conference, you could tell that Mugabe was very aggrieved by the manner in which he was forced to resign. He did say that he would have resigned in December, but saying that using the means that were used to remove him, he does not understand why that was used. So a lot of speculation and reports about Mugabe propelling or even funding Nelson Chamisa. Robert Mugabe saying he has not met him. He only met the founding father of the MDC, the late Morgan Tsvangirai. And that basically puts cold water on what some of those reports had suggested.
Was he asked directly about why the NFP, this party that's supposedly Mugabe backers and supposedly endorsed by President Mugabe, was at the final rally yesterday?
Not much was asked about that because we were attending to the press conference which had to wait for the conclusion of the one by the former president. But I think it really had tongues wagging about why then there would be Mugabe's backers at the final rally of the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance. So many had speculated at the time that perhaps this would suggest then that Mugabe felt very strongly about Nelson Chamisa, given how he feels about the way that he was removed from power, would then endorse Nelson Chamisa. So apart from I think what many journalists went there for, the critical issue was whether he felt Nelson Chamisa would be the right man to ascend to the highest office in Zimbabwe. So not much was asked about that, but I think right now, one can certainly say that he does believe that Nelson Chamisa should be the right man for the job.
Yeah, I mean, I think he, without outright endorsing him and saying, I will vote for Nelson Chamisa, he started by discounting the female voters, saying that Kupe and Mujuru, whilst they're the only female candidates, they don't seem to have much support. And
he hasn't
therefore,
seen their rallies.
Exactly. So he discounted them completely. Then he says, when you look at the other candidates then, really, there's only Chamisa. So by a process of deduction, I think one can reasonably say that he sees Chamisa as the only viable candidate left.
Absolutely, because if he's not going to vote for ZANU-PF, we're looking at two, if he talks about support, the fact that these two women do not have support, Mujuru and Kupe, then that would certainly mean that the viable option for him would be to vote for Nelson Chamisa, especially because recall, when that press conference started, he went into the history of what happened in November when you saw those protests in several parts of the country. And he mentioned not once, but several times, saying he would never vote for ZANU-PF, for the people who put him in the position that he is in. He spoke at length about someone who seemed to be very aggrieved, saying that he was not allowed visitors at his residence. And even those that did visit, there were questions asked about what those people said. So it certainly seems like he is very upset about the entire way that he was removed from office. Of course, that led to the resignation, a forced resignation. And he certainly seems like he does not want to have anything to do with ZANU-PF going forward. And Nelson Chamisa, on the other hand, basically says ZANU-PF must go away and clean up its house, leave him alone, because he believes come tomorrow he will be the next president of this country.
All right, we're going to talk again about President Robert Mugabe, but tomorrow is the election, and more than a lot of the other people, the MDC have been the ones bemoaning some of the things that they're concerned about, ballot papers, etc., etc. Did Nelson Chamisa speak again about those issues?
Well, that's certainly something we heard throughout the campaigning rallies that we have been to, Peter, bemoaning the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission again today, saying that it's against the law, the fact that they have not yet seen the voters' roll, saying that there are quite a number of other issues that they're concerned about that the Electoral Commission has not sought to address, even at this late stage. So whether there will be some kind of action that will be taken post tomorrow's election, I certainly think one could predict right now that they're not going to keep quiet if the election does not go in their favor. And there's been no response. In fact, SABC News will be speaking to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission in just a short while, and those are part of the questions that we want them to answer for us, because one could perhaps even suggest that they might even probably take it to to the courts.
All right, and then there is, of course, a concern that too many ballot papers have been printed. They're saying that there are 5.7 million people, or 6.1 actually, that are registered. And so if that's the case, they're only allowed, I think, a leeway of 10%, which would take it to 6.6 or 6.7. But if 7 million ballot papers have been printed, that means there's too many. And the question then becomes, if this is true, why have they overprinted? This is something that was seen in previous elections, and concerns were raised about that. And a proper accounting of the votes that were not used still hasn't been made. So that's a challenge. But I suppose with this election, what's going to make things a little bit harder to rig is the biometrics that are involved in verifying each voter.
Well, certainly, Peter, I think that's one of the issues that was raised by the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance. One of the other issues that they pointed to in that press conference, just before I get to what you've just asked, is the fact that people are being told that they cannot take pictures outside of the voting stations. Them clarifying, saying, of course, you cannot take one inside where you're going to vote, but outside of that, also urging Zimbabweans to really there's quite a number, I think about 8 to 10 hotline numbers that were given out by the MDC, urging Zimbabweans to call that hotline if they believe that there are any irregularities that are being committed at several of the polling stations tomorrow. And the biometrics, I think, would be something very close to watch. And that could perhaps be an argument that ZANU-PF could use at a later stage if there are questions raised about alleged rigging in these elections. That would be one of the things that would use perhaps to dispel that kind of argument about election rigging, I guess.
All right, Griselda, we're going to chat again a little bit later on. We'll continue to give you coverage here from Harare in Zimbabwe. And as I said, today, two big events taking place. President Robert Mugabe breaking his silence after such a long time and basically saying that the constitution was taken away by the barrel of a gun and that people must vote tomorrow and restore constitutionality. And he also said, please leave my wife alone. I want my grace to remain my grace. And he can't understand why she's being attacked every single day. He pointed out the state-owned newspaper, The Herald, as one of the chief attackers and said, please leave her alone. An attack on her is an attack on me. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot more said about that press conference and the one that Nelson Chamisa had today as well. And we'll also be chatting, as Griselda was saying, to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission a little bit later on, just to get a little bit of a heads up on the statistics of the ballot papers and where they are at this stage. That's all from us for the time being, and we'll chat to you again a little bit later on.
Thank you so much to our reporters out in Harare. That's Peter Ndora alongside Griselda Lewis giving us an update of the elections out in Zimbabwe. Let's now take you live to Bulawayo, where our other reporter, Tsepiso Makwetla, is stationed there, and she's giving us an update also leading up to tomorrow's elections. Tsepiso, a very good afternoon to you. That's a surprise announcement by the former president on who he is likely to vote for tomorrow. Tell us about the reaction on the ground to the latest utterances.
Thanks a lot, Alicia. It's been interesting, the press briefing by not only former President Robert Mugabe, but obviously there was one scheduled by Nelson Chamisa today. People in Bulawayo were very much aware because it made it onto not only national but local newspaper headlines that Nelson Chamisa, the MDC Alliance leader, says that he's been endorsed by President Robert Mugabe. So I must say, just an observation on my part, there was interest here in Bulawayo, but I certainly did not see widespread or excited interest. But we're going to talk about that with someone who falls within the demographic of the youth. And the reason we're doing that is because contemporary trends show in global politics that there has been a decrease of youth participation in democratic processes. In Zimbabwe, the country has 67 representation of this group, and that's between the ages of 16 and 35 years. And what latest studies have shown is that they've increasingly removed themselves from not only electoral processes but actual legwork in writing policies that are aimed at dealing with political and economic factors that that impact on the youth. We are with Sean Ndlovu, who is a technologist. He falls within this demographic. Sean, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Firstly, your reaction to President Mugabe's press briefing earlier on.
Well, my reaction to his press briefing, I feel it's the ramblings of an old man. That's how he feels. His time has passed. I think he just wanted to be relevant. He wanted to have maybe the last say before the election. I think most people spoke in November that he should sit down and retire. I think today, I don't know why he's getting so much media coverage, because he's from the old past, he's from the old, and his time is up. So I guess he wanted to feel relevant, or he still wants to have his finger in the political scene, basically.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, and you would obviously not speak for every youth in Zimbabwe, but you'd have more insight about what the youth as a demographic feel about the political parties that are being fielded for the harmonized elections this year. Are their policies speaking to you?
Well, there are policies that are speaking to us as youth, and it all comes down to the implementation by these political parties, whichever political party will win. There is a school of thought that when it comes to these policies that are out there, they are both there. These manifestos being sent out by all. In fact, almost every political party has this policy saying that the youth they are moving for. Some call it the smart policy. Some call it the different names basically for these policies. I think they are there. There are policies that speak to us as youth. It depends on who's going to win and who's going to implement it. And even prior to this, there have always been policies, but the implementation has always been a problem for this policy.
I get the implementation. Are there qualitative policy proposals, for instance? And I want you, because I know you've looked at a lot of those manifestos, do you feel that they not only could be enacted within the first 100 days of coming into power, and should one political party win this election?
I think they could be enacted within 100 days when these parties come in. I will allude to a very good example. There's a Bitcoin. Bitcoin was banned by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe because of some legislation. They felt it was bad, and then it was taken to the courts, and then it was reversed. But as a youth, that's the way the future is going. It's like digital money. We need that currency. We need that currency up and running in Zimbabwe. But it has been banned, or it was put on hold by the Reserve Bank, and then it was repealed. It was taken to court and it was repealed. So, like I say, the policies are there, but implementation. Coming back to your question, do you think it will be implemented in 100 days? I think yes, as long as there are willing people who are able to implement it. My view and the view of some of my colleagues is that I don't think it will be wise for this election be won by one party. I think maybe there should be some sort of, no party should have 100%, or should have the majority. I think all the parties are there. For example, everyone's talking about ZANU-PF, the MDC Alliance, and these one or two smaller parties, they should win and have seats in parliament, so that whenever these laws want to be enacted or whenever these parties want to make deals, they will talk to these smaller parties so that people who are not represented will have a say through these smaller parties. So my view is I would like an outcome whereby ZANU-PF does not have an outright majority in the election. Same goes for the MDC Alliance. But they have some sort of numbers that when they want to make these laws or enact laws, they have to make deals with these independent candidates or these smaller parties so that the country can move forward. Because we need checks and balances. We do not need one party to have the majority at this time. That's my view and some of the views of my colleagues.
I'm going to talk about ICT and the interventions or the use of it as an intervention by the youth to circumvent some of the challenges. But I just want to ask one final question on the youth in general. Is it one hegemonic group? Rural youth, urban youth, are they looking at the political spectrum the same? Are they likely to vote the same?
The youth, I think they'll vote the same. Everyone's looking for the future. We're planning for our future. We will vote for a candidate who promises to bring change or development for us going forward. When you talk about the ICTs that have come around, for example, I'm sure we're number 2 in Africa in using mobile money because it has penetrated, I think we've got 100% penetration rate using mobile phones. And mobile money has played a big role in Zimbabwe due to the fact that there are cash shortages and everyone has used mobile money to do their transaction, and there have been technological innovations that have gone around. There's been an app where a group of National University students from Bulawayo who have created apps that allow you to trade on the stock market in Zimbabwe, which is something that's kind of like fairly new to some of us, so that you have the ability from your mobile phone to be able to trade online, trade using this mobile technology using the stock market. And when it comes down to voting, I would think all of us want to go the same way, regardless of technology. You want something that will build the future. In the rural areas, I'm sure they're yearning for more penetration in 4G. We want faster internet, you name it. So I think we're going to vote for someone who's going to deliver their promises, again, depending on the manifestos that they have provided.
So let's look at the intervention of ICT, the use of these apps, because on the African continent, countries such as Uganda, Kenya, for instance, they have modified them that they deal with everyday problems that is specific to that community. Talk to us a little bit more about some of the work that's been done. I know that you are working with some youth on some apps.
Yes. An organization that I co-founded that we work with, called Site. We had an intervention whereby we consume our news. We are sending out news using the mobile phone. So basically, we're using these Facebook apps, WhatsApp apps, you name it, Twitter, to engage with our audience using mobile technology. What we have done, what we're trying to do, and what we're doing, we're trying to have African solutions to African problems. We cannot always rely on Facebook and Twitter, you name it, or WhatsApp. They have a different context. They are from the global south. We are from the global north. So we have to have technology that fits right into our thinking, that works for us. So we have to kind of like create these apps or softwares that we can relate to, that are built for Africans by Africans.
Thank you very much, Sean Ndlovu. He is a technologist, and we're looking at Zimbabweans across all sectors as they head to the polls tomorrow. You heard from former President Robert Mugabe saying that he hopes that tomorrow, God willing, as he put it, that it will be good news for Zimbabweans. Good news meaning that it will be a day that will further entrench, but he does, of course, argue that that doesn't exist. Further entrench the freedoms that were won in the 1980s, constitutionalism, democratization, all of that we'll be able to tell you if it does come to pass when we go to the polls. But of course, we will be coming back to you, Johannesburg, in the next hour or two as well. Alicia.
Thank you so much to Tsepiso Makwetla, live to us all the way in Bulawayo. She was joined by a representative of the youth there, and they were just gauging what the youth feels like ahead of these elections. Well,